I told first service that the intro music of that song makes me feel like I'm walking into like an Abercrombie. Like it just too tight t-shirts, a lot of cologne and bad decisions. But it kind of gets you ready. It kind of gets you ready. Hey, as we were leading up to the series, I felt so strongly that God was going to do something, that as we looked at the life of Moses, that God was going to stir some things within us and stir some things in our hearts. And I truly believe that he was going to work, but I had no idea that in the very first week, we would see so many breakthroughs. We would just see so many moments for people where they just connected with God in a deep and a meaningful way. And it has been so powerful this week to just hear stories of what God has been doing in your heart and in your life. And last Sunday was one of those weekends where, as we kicked off this series, we looked at the birth of Moses, and we looked at his life, and we looked at the ways that impacted us. And we learned this really important truth that I just wanted us to carry on into a little bit today, that we're called to be a steward of our story rather than a prisoner of it. A steward of our story rather than a prisoner of it. And Moses has this absolutely unique story, one of heartbreak and one of favor, one of blessing and one of challenge. A story in an effort to save him. His mother puts him in a basket, and she strategically places him in the Nile River near where Pharaoh's daughter was bathing. And when she sees Moses, her heart is moved with compassion, and so he is taken into the kingdom to be raised as a son of Pharaoh. And as he grew up in the palace, this pseudo prince of Egypt, he still knew his heritage. He still knew where he came from. He still saw what was happening to the people around him in his life. And you'd have to imagine that he knew that he was completely different than so many others who were in the classroom with him, in the palace with him. But he chose to learn in the waiting. He chose to not be a prisoner of his story, but to steward it in the best way that he could. And during the first 40 years of Moses' life, he learns the Egyptian language. He learns their culture. He learns their philosophy. He learns how they constructed things. He learns their religions. He's traveling up and down the Nile River, seeing the vastness of the kingdom of Egypt, but also seeing the oppression of his people. And something within him continued to stir. And from birth, everyone around him could see this calling on his life. The Bible describes him as this unique, this special baby, this baby that obviously was set apart for something, and everyone could sense it and feel it in their journey. And surely Moses felt it as well, but he didn't exactly know what to do with it. He would see the oppression of his people, but he wasn't really sure how he was supposed to respond. But there's something in him that said, I'm supposed to do something about this. There was a dissatisfaction with his life. Growing up in the riches of Egypt was not enough to satiate him. There's something that was stirring within him, to a point that he couldn't take it any longer. And it leads us to this unique truth that I want to unpack for a second, that Moses sensed the calling, but he had not pursued the caller. He sensed this calling within him, and he sensed that there was something different. He said, well, Danny, how could you say that he didn't pursue the caller, that he wasn't pursuing God? Well, most scholars believe that Moses wrote the vast majority of the Torah, which is the first 5 books of the Bible. And so if Moses is penning the story, if Moses is the one writing this, I start to look at some context clues within the Torah. And when Moses is writing about the story of his predecessor, Joseph, Moses over and over again uses this phrase, and I love it so much in the story of Joseph, and God was with him. Moses would write that when Joseph's brother threw him into the pit, God was with him. When Joseph was serving in Potiphar's house as a slave, God was with him. When he was in the prison for something that he didn't do and he was accused of, Moses again writes, and God was with him. God was with him in the pit. He was with him in the palace. He was with him in Potiphar's house. He was with him throughout his journey. But nowhere in this section of the story does Moses ever write the words, and I felt God was with me. Even if he did it weirdly and was like the third person, and Moses felt that God was with him. Like nowhere do we see him write those words. So there's part of me that believes that he felt this calling, but he didn't know where to go. He didn't know the caller yet. He was being raised in the palace with all of these other gods, and surely he might have remembered a little bit from his birth and seeing the Hebrews and hearing them talk about God, but I don't believe he truly knew him deeply yet. And it led him to do something that you and I do so many times when we miss a calling in our life. In Exodus 2:11, it says this: many years later, when Moses had grown up, he went out to visit his own people, the Hebrews, and he saw how hard they were forced to work. And during his visit, he saw an Egyptian beating one of his fellow Hebrews. And after looking in all directions, in other words, he was like, oh, was anybody looking? Nobody's looking? Great. He kills the Egyptian, and he buries and hides the body in the sand. The next day, when Moses went out to visit his people again, he saw two Hebrew men fighting. He says, why are you beating up your friend? Moses says to the one who started the fight, and the man replied, who appointed you to be our prince? Who appointed you to be our judge? Are you going to kill me like you killed that Egyptian yesterday? And fear sets in to Moses' heart. My mistake has been made known. I'm in trouble now. We see this clear difference between compassion and pure passion. This difference between compassion and passion. Moses could no longer take these injustices. You imagine that this is the first time that Moses has seen one of his Hebrew brethren get beat? No, of course not. But there's something that's been stirring. There's this dissatisfaction in his heart. There's something that he just feels like, I'm supposed to do something about this, and I can't take it anymore. I'm going to do something about it. But he does something in his own power. He knew he was supposed to do something about this abuse, but he didn't connect with God first to see what his response to the calling was meant to be. And it leads us to this important truth that a calling without God's direction leads to mistakes. A calling without God's direction leads us to taking things into our own hands. I remember in our journey together, Lauren and I, this is many years ago, Lauren and I hit this it felt like a life wall. Like we're doing the things that we're supposed to do, but it just felt like we just kept bumping up against this wall. And there was this dissatisfaction that like, God, I feel like you're releasing us to something else. You're releasing us to more. So we just started to pray together. It was just like, man, God, I don't know what it is that you have for me, but we're ready. We're here. Whatever you want to do, we just sense this stirring kind of in our spirit. And at the time, I was working at a local bank, and it was one of those like really slow days that you get like 3 customers a day, and it's like, I got to be here for 8 hours. How in the world am I going to survive this? And so I was reading my Bible, and I was praying. And in the moment, I just felt so sure of it. In the moment, I was like, I feel like God is telling me, Danny, you guys love Atlanta. You're moving to Atlanta. You just go. You are ready. And I was just like all excited. I was all fired up about it. I was like crying in the bathroom. I was just like, yes, here we go. Because Lauren and I loved Atlanta at the time. We hadn't been here. And now you go to Atlanta, it ain't all that hot. But back in the day, Atlanta was awesome. And it was a place we would go to escape, and we'd go there and we'd dream about what would it look like if we could finally get out of the country in Mobile, Alabama, and live in a city. We can't wait for those days. And so I called Lauren up on my break, and I said, hey, we need to meet up before church tonight. I got something to tell you. I'm so excited. So I remember exactly where we were. We went to a Hardee's or a Carl's Jr. This is before gluten-free days, so we could eat like you regular people. We can't do that anymore. But we were sitting at a Hardee's, and I said, babe, God told me we're moving to Atlanta. I'm so excited about it. I can't wait. We've wanted to move, and this is the moment. And just like stone-faced, Lauren was just like, nah, I don't think that's what God's telling us. I said, what do you mean? I had a moment with the Lord. I feel like this is what we're supposed to do. And she's like, babe, I do not feel that at all. And I was devastated. So we went to church and we served and we did what we need to do. And I was like, hey, you just go home. I need to stay here. I need to stay here and I just need to pray. And I got some things I need to work out with God because I'm real frustrated right now. And I remember I sat there and I was working through and I was praying and I was like, God, I don't understand. How did I miss you? I was mad at him. I was mad at Lauren. I was mad at myself. Like, how did I miss this so, like, how did this happen? And a couple hours later, I was laid out on the floor, exhausted and crying. And just, I was like, I'm going to read the whole book of Proverbs because there's wisdom in there somewhere. And I'm going to figure it out somewhere. And it's going to say, and thou shalt move to Atlanta. And it just didn't say that. And I was so mad. And I was frustrated. And at the end of it, I just felt God saying no. Somehow in the moment, I just missed it. And so I drove back home, and Lauren was like, well, and I mumbled something about God hating me, and we're not moving to Atlanta, and just whatever. So the next day, Lauren and I were talking through this moment again. And we just decided, hey, we feel this pressing, we feel this release, but we're just going to say, hey, God, whatever you want to do, whenever you want to do it, wherever you want to do it, our hands and our lives are open to you. Send us where you want us to go. And 2 months later, we got a random call from some people to go to a place that was 2 hours east of Atlanta, to a city that we'd never been, to a church that we'd never been to, but some friends of Lauren's family were there. And I'm telling you, we didn't even go to a service. We didn't see church services. We didn't hear 1 ounce of music. We walked onto the campus, and we went and had dinner, and we laid down in the bed that night, and Lauren and I looked at each other, and we said, this is it. This is where we're supposed to be. And we were, and it was. And for 6 years, we served at an amazing church, and for 6 years, God shaped and molded us, and for 6 years, we learned, and we grew, and we trained, and in that place, we had both of our daughters were born there. We met some of our best friends in the world, and it was through the connections that we made there that led us to be here in our forever home in San Diego. Like, it was just this amazing way that God worked when we let go. An amazing time when I was trying to force my way, and thankfully God spoke to Lauren enough to go, no. And he did something powerful in our life. And the challenge that I have for you today is that your journey of your calling begins with fully surrendering to God and saying, hey, God, not my plan, not my agenda, not my way, not how I expect it to be, not how I picture it, but God, I will trust you to do whatever you want to do in my life. How will you use me? And you see, it leads us to this, that an idea, a dream, a calling that is initiated by God but is led by you will lead you into the wilderness. You see, I've told you this for a while. God has deposited some things within you. God has called you. God has gifted you. There's so many things that have been deposited into your life. Those are initiated by God, but when it's led by me, when it's led by you, it usually leads us into a season of the wilderness, into the worrying, into the waiting, into the struggle. But I don't want you to miss something that was really important in this story. I don't want you to miss something that was said, and it seems so small, but what we will see next week is it was a seed that was deposited into the soul of Moses. Remember what the man said to him when Moses says, hey, why are you fighting with each other? What did he say? Who appointed you to be our prince? Who appointed you to be our judge? You see, this was Moses' first attempt at stepping into his calling. And it blew up in his face. This was his first attempt to step out because he was empowered by his own strength and did it in his own timing. It led to a mistake that required him to run to the wilderness. It led to confusion. It led to seeds of doubt being planted in his heart. Acts 7:24 actually says it this way. He says, he saw an Egyptian mistreating an Israelite. So Moses came to the man's defense and avenged him, killing the Egyptian. Look at what it says. Verse 25. Moses assumed his fellow Israelites would realize that God sent him to rescue them, but they didn't. He assumed, well, hey, I feel this calling in my life. It's time for me to go now and do now. And he assumed that everyone would go, yay! But he stepped out in his own time, in his own strength, and it led to confusion. And it placed the seed of doubt in his heart that the next time he was going to be faced with his calling, it started to stir some insecurities within him. Moses had ambition without wisdom. He had desire without discernment. He had aspiration without the humility that it required. And it's another reminder that spiritual ends are not completed by man-made means. The things that we want to accomplish in the Spirit cannot and will not happen in our own strength and our own power. So the story continues in verse 14. Then Moses was afraid, thinking everyone would know what I did. And sure enough, Pharaoh heard what had happened, and he tried to kill Moses. But Moses fled from Pharaoh, and he went to live in the land of Midian. When Moses arrived in Midian, he sat down beside a well. And now the priest of Midian had 7 daughters who came as usual to draw water and fill the water troughs for their father's flocks. But some other shepherds came and they chased them away. So Moses jumped up and he rescued the girls from the shepherds, and then he drew water for their flocks. When the girls returned to Reuel, their father, he asked, "Why are you back so soon today?" He said, "An Egyptian rescued us from the shepherds, and then he drew water for us, and he watered our flocks." And he said, "Well, then where is he? Why did you leave him there? Invite him to come and eat with us." And Moses accepted the invitation, and he settled there with him. And in time, Reuel, or other translations say his name, Jethro, gave Moses his daughter, Zipporah, to be his wife. What I want you to recognize here is that God didn't force Moses into the wilderness, but he still used the wilderness season. You can correct me and we can talk about it after, but nowhere in Scripture do I see where it says Moses had to end up in Midian. I don't see anywhere in Scripture where it says Moses had to kill the Egyptian in order for God's plan to come about. But what it shows me about the nature and the heart of God is that even when we make a mistake, even when we do things in our own power and our own strength, his redemptive nature redeems the flaw, redeems the failure, and can still use it for his glory. I believe the burning bush could have still happened whether Moses was living in the palace or whether he was out in the wilderness. I believe God would have still found a way to accomplish his purpose. And maybe for some of us, we've made that mistake. We've taken that step. We've done things in our own strength and our own power. And the enemy wants to convince you that you've done something so bad that you will never be back in God's plan. And Moses' story is a reminder that no matter how far we've gone, no matter what mistake we've made, God is still willing to be there with open arms, to love us, to restore us, and to redeem even the worst of our seasons in order to bring glory to his name. But again, we also see Moses had another chance for his compassion and his calling. Now, I don't know about you, but after this happened, and I'm sitting there at the well, and these ladies come up, and and these rude shepherds come and they push him out of the way, Moses probably had this feeling inside of him that's like, nah, bro, I ain't helping nobody else. Last time I did that, see what happened? I'm not messing with this. I'm not stepping into my calling. I'm not doing any of that stuff. And I wonder for you, maybe that's been your journey. Maybe for you, you sensed something within you and you stepped out and you felt like it blew up in your face. You stepped out and you tried to help somebody and it didn't go the way that you wanted it to. You tried to step into your calling and you tried to do the best that you could do and the relationship still didn't work. The struggle was still present. And there's a part of you that wants to close off and go, well, God, if it didn't work then it'll never work now. But again, Moses gives us this example that God will continually present opportunities for you to step into your calling. And so he defends these women. He shows up and it leads to this amazing door for Moses to step through, another moment of miracle. And you see, it leads us to this truth that when God is leading, when God leads, purpose flows. When we lead, purpose is forced. I don't know if you've ever experienced this, but there have been times in my life when I'm trying to force a door open, and I feel like a SWAT team, like, open the door! And God's like, no! And everything feels forced. Everything is a struggle. Everything is a battle. Everything just feels like, why is this draining my soul? Like, this should be so simple. And then there's other moments where I see God at work and I step in the flow of what he's doing, and it's like I'm on an inner tube down a raging river. It's just easy. God is just moving. We're just flowing. You see, when God leads, when we lift our eyes to see where he's at work and we step into what he is doing, there is a flow that follows. But when we try to do it in our own strength and our own power, in our own way, in our own timing, it's forced. It's an uphill battle. And some of you, it feels like you're trying to connect with your purpose. You're trying to connect with your meaning. You want to do this, but it feels like you're swimming upstream against this raging river. And it's like, why is this so hard? And my encouragement to you would be to do what Moses did, to sit still and lift your eyes up and say, God, where is it that you are at work? Where are you flowing? And how can I step into it? Where is your spirit moving that I can step into it? And you might be thinking as we read this, like, why is this so significant? And like, cool, he got a wife. Woohoo! Like, isn't in the Old Testament they got like 800 of them? Like, what's the big deal about it? No, this was huge. This was so huge. In verse 16, there was a little word that has huge implications. Verse 16 said, the priest of Midian. The priest. You see, Jethro was a direct descendant of Abraham. And he was the priest of Elohim. He was the priest of Yahweh. He was the priest of the one true God. And so maybe for the first time in Moses' life, surely Moses had heard of God, of Yahweh from being around the other Hebrews who would tell us stories, but he wasn't living with them. And while he was with his mother, while he was nursing, he was still a baby. As he got older, he has 40 years in an Egyptian palace, learning all of their religion, learning all of those pieces, learning all of those things. Maybe for the first time in his life, he's sitting next to a priest of the one true God. And Jethro is able to tell him about the God of Abraham and the God of Isaac and the God of Jacob. And able to tell him the stories of his predecessor, how God used Joseph to open the door for the Hebrews to be protected in Egypt when the famine destroyed the rest of the area around them. Moses got to learn about this caller who had been calling him from within. He got to learn about this God that had been stirring in his heart. And for the next 40 years, he got to learn who God really was. A moment that seems so insignificant. And that's what I feel like God has tried to show me in this. Sometimes there's these insignificant moments that opens doors to significance we could never imagine. Moses stumbles on a well and rescues some ladies, which leads him into a beautiful marriage. I'm so glad that he found him an awesome wife, but it also led to him being in a family who served and loved the one true God. And he learned to listen for the voice of that God, connecting the dots between his dissatisfaction and his calling. You see, God is not finished with us in the wilderness. It's usually where he does his best work. God is not finished with us in the wilderness. You see this in your notes. It's usually where he does his best work. So many times we feel like, man, I've made a mistake, or I'm just off track, or I'm just in the season of struggle, and it's the valley, or everything's an uphill battle, and we think, well, surely God is not here. Surely once I get through this, then he'll meet me on the other side. No. He does his best work in the wilderness. He does his best work in the waiting. I love how A.W. Tozer says it when he talks about our calling and our purpose and the pressures in our life. And he says this: a true and safe leader is likely one who has no desire to lead, but is forced into a position of leadership by the inward pressure of the Holy Spirit and by the press of the external situation. There's a pressing. There's an opportunity that presents itself, but rarely do we ever feel like we're ready for that call. Usually the call of God interrupts the ordinary, and we have an opportunity to listen to his call. In our young adult group, we were talking about being undistracted in our purpose. And one of the ladies in the group, she asked a really powerful and important question. How do you know what your purpose is? How do you figure this out? Like, we talk about it a lot. We unpack it a lot. Well, how do you know? Many times our purpose, it finds us when we least expect it. So many times we assume that our purpose will find us on the mountaintop. Our purpose will find us in the greatest moments of our life. We expect our purpose to find us when everything is amazing and the sun is shining and the flowers are everywhere and it's butterflies. Woo! Now I can find purpose. So many times our purpose finds us when we're in the wilderness of what if. It finds us in the wilderness of what now, God? What am I supposed to do now? Many times it finds us in the wilderness of, well, if it isn't going to happen now, then is it ever going to happen? Our purpose finds us when we least expect it. And so my answer to her was really simple, but also difficult at the same time. That discovering our calling, it requires us to sit and to wait and to watch. To watch for where God is at work. To lift our eyes and see what God is doing in and around our lives. And as we sit and as we wait, we start to investigate some things within our life. And this is how I believe you discover your purpose. You discover your purpose by investigating your story. You discover your purpose by investigating your giftings. You discover your purpose by investigating your passions. You discover your purpose by investigating your calling. You see, when you look at the life of Moses, when you investigate his story was an adopted Hebrew living as a prince of Egypt. There's so many tangles, there's so many connection points, there's so many things in his story. Next week, we're going to see where God meets him face to face and says, Moses, now is the time for you to step into the calling that you've been sensing for 80 years. And while you and I might think that would be a moment of triumph, for Moses, it was a moment of uncertainty and insecurity. And I believe God is going to do something next week in some people's lives that I've sensed it in my heart since the beginning of this week. But here's what I want to wrap up with. That in pursuit of everything that we're doing, in pursuit of God, in the pursuit of our purpose, we have to be careful that in the pursuit of our purpose, we don't bankrupt our soul. In ministry, there's a saying that we say all the time to one another that never sacrifice your family on the altar of ministry. And it simply means that, like, as pastors and as people in ministry, a lot of times we sacrifice our family in order to care for everybody else, but not care for our own. It's just that reminder, don't sacrifice what's most important for all of the other things. But regardless of what your calling is, regardless of what your purpose is, your purpose does not require you to steal someone else's light in order for your light to shine brighter. Your purpose does not require you to crush the heart of someone else in order for you to better yourself. Your purpose does not require you to leave your family behind in order to step into what God is calling you to. Your purpose should not be something that leads you to bankrupt your soul in order to accomplish more. So we sit and we wait and we investigate. And we say, God, where are you moving? What are you doing? You see, sometimes we bankrupt our soul because we won't stop running. And we're so exhausted and we're so burned out that we just keep doing it and we're hoping God is blessing it, but we've never stopped to ask. In pursuit of our purpose, family, don't bankrupt your soul. Let's sit and pause and wait and investigate and say, God, where are you moving so that I can step into it? And as we do that, purpose will flow rather than be forced. Would you stand with me in this moment? I just want to encourage you in this moment that God's anointing, God's direction, God's presence, it's sufficient for you. He is more than enough. And in every season, and in every mountain, and in every struggle, and every battle, in every wilderness moment, in those seasons of waiting, and those seasons of uncertainty, the promise is that He is faithful. And He will be with us. He will provide the love and the grace and the hope and the freedom and the peace we so desperately need. So as we get ready to respond here for just a moment, our prayer team is in place. And I just want to encourage you, maybe for some of you, the prayer that you have today is God, I need to sense your calling. What is it that you're calling me to, God? I feel a stirring within me, but I don't know what I'm supposed to do, and I don't know where I'm supposed to go. God, would you reveal to me those things? Maybe for you need to meet with one of our prayer team that they could pray over you as you investigate your story. For so many people last week, God unlocked some pieces of their story that led to a breakthrough in their life. Maybe you need the courage to step into that, to investigate your story, to investigate the giftings in your life, to investigate what's happening, and say, hey, God, what am I missing in my own journey that can lead me to the freedom and the hope and the breakthrough that I need? Maybe for some of you today, your decision is is one of significance, to simply say, hey, God, I've been running from you for far too long. I haven't recognized your voice. I haven't responded to your call. And today, I want to surrender my life to you. Put my hope and my trust in you. Whatever it is that you need to do today, I would challenge you in this moment to respond. For every moment and every season that we are in, He is faithful, He is good, and He is worthy of our praise. Let us respond to Him as we lift our voice, our sing and pray with our prayer team.